what almost no one knows. Isaiah chapter 6 is not the 6th chapter of the prophet's book, it is the first. Chronologically, this is where it all begins. We explore why the vision of God's throne, the Seraphim, and the cleansing fire begins precisely in the year King Uzziah died, marking the collapse of human hierarchy and the birth of true prophetic speech. Everything before this moment describes the condition of the nation. Everything after it flows from this single vision. The structure is deliberate. First, the vineyard fails in chapter 5, and only then is the prophet allowed to see why. Because the people have mistaken earthly stability for divine presence. Uzziah's death marks the end of an era in which holiness was assumed to be preserved through political strength and institutional continuity. His failure was crossing forbidden boundaries. The king entered the priesthood. Political power entered sacred space. Power mistook itself for holiness. Once the lower throne is emptied, the higher throne becomes visible. Isaiah 6 reveals a moment when divine governance shifts from mercy through mediators to locked-in judgment because human hierarchy collapsed. The prophet perceives not God himself, but the structure of rule, enthroned, elevated beyond mercy, overflowing even sacred vessels. His fear is the consequence of clarity, not sin. His mission is not to avert decree, but to preserve moral freedom while history fulfills what structure now demands. Isaiah sets the vision in a moment of collapse. He says that it was in the year King Uzziah died that he perceived the Lord seated upon a throne, exalted, uplifted, while the edge of his garment filled the sanctuary. This timing is not incidental. Heaven responds differently to the fall of a person than to the collapse of structures. Structures can be rebuilt. A human death cannot be undone. That finality creates a crack in the world, and through that crack, vision enters. Death breaks the world open. Suddenly, reality presses inward. As long as King Uzziah lived, something in the national soul remained intact enough to resist seeing. His presence stabilized perception. When he dies, that reassurance dies with him. Only then does Isaiah see. When Isaiah says he perceived the Lord, he describes the moment when inner vision awakens, when the soul realizes that life is larger, deeper, and more demanding than it allowed itself to feel before. This awakening is not gentle. It comes with trembling. Isaiah's fear is not moral panic. It is the shock of encountering truth without filters. When earthly kingship occupies too much holy space, divine kingship withdraws into concealment. When that earthly presence is removed by death, not rebellion, the higher throne becomes visible again. The throne is reassurance hidden inside terror. History is not collapsing into chaos. It is being reclaimed by meaning. Even when a human king dies, governance does not disappear. It reveals its deeper source. The verse describes the throne as exalted and uplifted, not merely high, but unreachable. This height is the place where self-certainty dissolves. Divine kingship cannot be managed by religious achievement or moral confidence. And even the edge, the garment, the overflow, fills the temple entirely. Even what is not the essence overwhelms the holiest human vessel. When divine light presses so fully into the vessel, it demands transformation. The temple here is not only stone and sacrifice, it is the inner sanctuary of the prophet himself. Isaiah is being filled beyond comfort. That filling will burn his lips. That filling will remake his speech. This is the moment prophecy begins. When a king dies, when illusion collapses, when the soul becomes empty enough for the king to appear. Having seen the throne, Isaiah now notices who stands around it. The verse describes seraphim standing above him. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. The seraphim appear not as decoration, but as the reordering of reality around true kingship. This verse is not about angels as creatures. It is about how existence behaves when divine rule becomes visible. The first response to divine kingship is not motion, but standing. Angels do not ascend or descend, they stand. Only man is called a walker. Standing means total restraint. No inner change, no becoming, no struggle toward growth. The seraphim represent existence fixed in obedience, beings who know their task, but not its reason. These beings are called seraphim, burning ones, because truth that appears without preparation is felt as fire. All heavenly forces act only by measure and limit, never beyond what is commanded. This fire is not rage, it is clarity without cushioning. When holiness arrives before readiness, it appears as judgment. The seraphim are truth in motionless form, burning without consuming. The angel has no self. It is the form of action alone. The text tells us each seraph has 6 wings. 6 is the number of ordered creation, of space held within bounds. 6 represents governance across all dimensions, north, south, east, west, up, down. Judgment operates in every direction. There is no escape path, no ungoverned domain. But the wings are not for display. They are instruments of restraint. Most of the seraph's capacity is withheld. Very little is active. By describing how the seraph uses its wings, the verse reveals the structure of divine judgment. The greater the light, the greater the need for concealment. With 2 wings the seraph covers his face. Face represents comprehension. The ministering angels know their task, not its reason. Meaning is withheld so that freedom is not destroyed by clarity. With 2 wings the seraph covers his feet. Feet represent outcome. The seraph does not reveal where judgment lands in history. If agents knew outcomes, execution would become intention, and angels may not intend. This double concealment preserves both meaning and moral responsibility for humans. Holiness restrains itself so that life may grow toward it. With only 2 wings does the seraph fly. Action is permitted, but only after restraint. Most capacity is restrained. Judgment is executed minimally, precisely, without excess. The world survives not because judgment is weak, but because it is restrained. Where human kingship failed by crossing categories, the seraphim repair the order by never crossing theirs. After the seraphim demonstrate restraint, standing, and disciplined fire, sound finally emerges. The verse tells us that one called to another and said, "Kadosh, Kadosh. Kadosh is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory." Speech does not begin until hierarchy is restored and holiness has shown how it limits itself. Only then can holiness be named. The seraphim do not sing about God. They testify to how God relates to reality. The word Kadosh does not mean pure or good. It means separate, set apart, irreducible. Holiness here is not moral praise, but ontological distance. God is not one force among others, not even the greatest force. He is categorically other. This is why the angels do not say it once. A single declaration would imply a single dimension. Holiness must be spoken in layers. The triple Kadosh speaks across 3 dimensions. The first Kadosh declares that God was holy before the world appeared, before history, before structure, before human meaning. Holiness precedes creation. The second Kadosh declares that God is holy within the world, present, governing, sustaining, yet never absorbed by what he fills. God fills the world, but is not contained by it. The third Kadosh declares that God will remain holy after the world reaches its end, beyond history, beyond redemption, beyond even the perfected future. Even when all is healed, God remains beyond. Holiness stands across all time at once. Isaiah stands at a point where past certainty has died, the present is trembling, and the future is unknown. The angels respond by declaring that God is equally beyond and sovereign over all three. The verse shows us that one calls to another. No single voice can carry this truth alone. Angels are not beings with inner mental states. They are forces. They are functions. Angelic speech is not communication, it is synchronization. Each angel represents a distinct axis of governance. Reality is spoken only when all governing forces are perfectly aligned. Speech marks finality. Once time itself is synchronized across past, present, and future, silence is no longer appropriate. Reality has crossed a threshold. The verse says the whole earth is filled with his glory. Glory is not essence, it is manifestation. God's holiness remains separate, but his glory fills the earth. God is utterly other, and yet fully present. This distinction preserves human freedom. If holiness itself filled the earth, choice would vanish. Instead, glory fills the world, signs, echoes, traces, while holiness remains beyond grasp. Once holiness is articulated across all time, reality itself reacts. The verse says that the doorposts shook at the voice of the one who called, and the house was filled with smoke. The response is not illumination, but destabilization. The first things to move are not people, but thresholds. Thresholds represent the interface between realms, inside and outside, sacred and profane, finite and infinite. When holiness is named properly, Kadosh, 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 those interfaces cannot remain still. They shake because the categories they manage are under strain. This shaking does not mean destruction. It means exposure. It is the voice that causes the shaking, not a blow, not fire, sound. Sound is intangible yet penetrating. The voice of holiness, spoken correctly with restraint, reaches places that force cannot. Form cannot contain essence. When infinite meaning presses into finite vessels, the result is not harmony, but trembling. At this point, the house fills with smoke. Not light, not clarity. Smoke. Smoke represents concealment produced by excess revelation. When light becomes too intense, it blinds. When holiness arrives before readiness, it wraps itself in cloud so that existence is not undone by exposure. Smoke is not absence. It is moderated presence. This preserves freedom. The house fills with smoke so that humans can remain human. The house is not only the temple, it is the inner sanctuary of the prophet. Isaiah is enveloped. His orientation dissolves. This is the first time Isaiah speaks. He says, "Woe is me, for I am undone, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." When the higher order is revealed, the lower order recognizes its misalignment. Isaiah does not suddenly become sinful. He suddenly becomes accurate. The cry of woe is the sound of encountering truth without mediation. Isaiah does not say he has sinned. He says he is undone. The issue is not behavior, but being. When Isaiah says he is a man of unclean lips, he means that lips represent articulation and the power to frame reality. Since a prophet speaks for God, the impurity of speech is the deepest possible exposure to unmediated holiness. As long as divine light was mediated through history and institutions, Isaiah could function within language. Once the throne is revealed and the house fills with smoke, language itself breaks. When vision deepens, separation disappears. The prophet no longer stands above the nation, but stands within it, sharing its limitations. True vision produces humility, not distance. Isaiah explains why this has happened. He says his eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. There is a light so strong that it burns away all understanding, and all articulation with it. This is the moment when the soul loses its ground. Isaiah is unmade. This is why this moment must come before purification. The lips cannot be cleansed until they are recognized as insufficient. Only a person who knows that his speech is inadequate can be trusted with words that will reshape history. In seeing the King, Isaiah loses himself, and in losing himself, he becomes a vessel. A seraph flies to Isaiah with a glowing coal in his hand, which he had taken from upon the altar with tongs, and he touched his mouth and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is removed, and your sin is atoned for." This is the moment when collapse becomes capacity. After Isaiah is undone by sight, after speech has failed, and the self has dissolved, response finally comes, not as explanation, but as transformation. A seraph must move. Exposure precedes rectification, and rectification must come from the same realm that revealed the flaw. Isaiah's lips failed because speech could not withstand unmediated holiness. The repair of speech must come from fire rooted in holiness itself. The seraph takes the coal from the altar, the meeting point between human offering and divine acceptance. Fire from the altar is consecrated fire, fire that has already passed through covenant. The coal carries judgment that has been sweetened by purpose. It burns, but it burns toward life. The coal is carried with tongs. Even angels do not grasp raw holiness directly. When a person reaches the point of true humility, when the self no longer defends its speech, its righteousness, or its identity, then heaven intervenes. The coal is brought precisely because Isaiah no longer resists it. If the coal had touched Isaiah before he was undone, it would have hardened him. Fire given before humility becomes ideology. Fire given after surrender becomes illumination. When the coal touches Isaiah's mouth, the seraph does not say he is now worthy. He says this has touched your lips. The emphasis is on contact, not status. Transformation happens through encounter, not achievement. Isaiah's speech was not destroyed by sin, but weakened by mismatch. His lips were not evil. They were human. Fire does not remove humanity. It recalibrates it. The seraph declares, "Your iniquity is removed, and your sin is atoned for." He does not list sins. The blockage has been lifted. When the vessel is realigned, obstruction falls away on its own. Vision shattered the false self. Smoke preserved freedom. Confession dissolved resistance. Fire reformed speech. Isaiah is not made perfect. He is made usable. Only after this moment can God ask, "Whom shall I send?" This is not the silencing of the prophet. It is the birth of speech that can bear fire without becoming flame. At this stage, the vision shifts. Isaiah hears the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And Isaiah answers, "Here I am, send me." This is the quiet turning point of Isaiah 6. Until now, everything has happened to Isaiah. He saw, he trembled, he was undone, he was purified. For the first time, something is asked of him. Prophecy does not begin with command, but with invitation. God does not say, "Go." He asks, "Whom shall I send?" True divine service cannot be coerced. Heaven waits for a human will to awaken on its own. Only after purification is complete does choice become meaningful again. When the self is emptied of illusion and fear, a deeper self can finally speak. Isaiah is no longer defending identity, reputation, or righteousness. He has nothing left to protect. In that emptiness, responsiveness is born. "Here I am" is not courage, it is availability. It is the soul saying, "There is nothing in me left that resists being sent." Isaiah volunteers before hearing the mission. He does not ask where, to whom, or for how long. When the self is aligned, the content of the mission no longer determines willingness. Service is rooted in relationship, not outcome. The phrase "who will go for us" matters. Divine speech here is not solitary. It is relational. This plural language hints at partnership between heaven and earth. Prophecy is not God speaking instead of humans, but God speaking through a willing human presence. Collapse removed illusion. Vision revealed kingship. Fire healed expression. What began as invitation now becomes responsibility. Prophecy does not begin when God speaks. It begins when a human answers. "Here I am" is not the end of fear. It is the end of resistance. Only after this moment can the hard message of the next verses be entrusted to a human voice, because only a person who volunteers without conditions can carry words that will not be welcomed. God now explains the difficult job. He proclaims, "Go and say to this people, you will keep hearing, but you will not understand. You will keep seeing, but you will not truly grasp." This is not a curse, and not a command to blind. It is a diagnosis spoken aloud. Speech at this stage does not heal, but preserves. When reality reaches a point where truth cannot be absorbed, prophecy shifts function. It no longer reforms the present, it safeguards the future. Isaiah's words prevent collapse from becoming meaninglessness. They mark the moment so that later generations will recognize what went wrong, and where repair must begin. A person can hear endlessly and never understand if hearing becomes a defense, noise that replaces listening. Likewise, one can see constantly and never know if seeing is used to confirm what one already believes. When a culture's language of holiness outpaces its inner growth, clarity would crush freedom. Therefore, meaning withdraws, not as punishment, but as mercy. God sends a prophet not to force change, but to name the blockage, to say aloud what everyone feels but cannot admit. We hear, we see, and yet we are not changed. Isaiah is not sent to close their eyes. He is sent because their eyes are already closed. And by speaking this truth, he ensures that the silence will not last forever. The text deepens the diagnosis. The heart of this people has become dull, their ears have become heavy, their eyes have been closed. As a result, they do not see with their eyes, do not hear with their ears, do not understand with their heart, and so they do not return and be healed. The grammar matters. The heart has grown dull, the ears have become heavy, the eyes have been closed. These are outcomes, not commands. When divine truth is encountered repeatedly without response, the inner faculties adapt defensively. Sensitivity dulls, not because truth is absent, but because it has been refused. If clarity alone could force repentance, repentance would lose its meaning. Healing requires participation. The failure begins in the heart, moves outward to the ears, and only then affects the eyes. When that inward movement is blocked, even abundant revelation cannot penetrate. A dull heart still feels faint echoes. Heavy ears still register sound. Closed eyes still sense movement. The verse describes weakening, not destruction. The channels are narrowed, not destroyed. This is precisely why prophecy continues. Isaiah's ongoing mission proves that the possibility of return remains alive. Isaiah is sent not to blind the people, but to speak while they are blind, so that when sight returns, the path back is already marked. Isaiah asks, "Until when, O Lord?" And God answers, "Until cities lie desolate without inhabitant, houses without people, and the land is left desolate. And God will distance the people, and abandonment will be great within the land." This is not theological curiosity. It is moral anguish. Having been told that his words will not heal immediately, Isaiah asks, "How long must this condition last?" This question itself proves that prophecy has not extinguished compassion. The answer is severe but precise. Cities without inhabitants, houses without people, land emptied of its life. When inner form collapses, outer form must eventually follow. Yet this desolation is not annihilation. It is clearing. The land must become silent so that it can hear again. The verse names distance itself as the defining experience. God does not distance the people suddenly or arbitrarily. The distance reflects a separation that has already taken root within consciousness. Distance is the most painful form of concealment because it feels like abandonment. Distance leaves silence, yet this silence is the last protection of freedom. When words no longer reach and clarity no longer helps, the only remaining teacher is absence. The land's emptiness awakens longing. Longing is the final thread that binds a soul to its source when understanding has failed. This distance is measured, purposeful, and temporary. It clears the space in which genuine return can be born, not from clarity, not from fear, but from yearning. Isaiah 6 shows a painful law. When hearts remain closed, history must speak. Cities empty because meaning was emptied first. But Isaiah's question itself already contains hope. He asks until when, not why. He assumes there is an end. The answer is difficult, but it is not endless. Desolation lasts only until the ground is ready to receive life again. The vision closes with an unexpected reversal, yet there will remain within it a tenth, and it will return and be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak, which, when felled, still has a trunk remaining within it. The holy seed is its trunk. The harsh mission finds its answer. Destruction is not total, and exile is not the end of life. After distance, abandonment, and repeated burning, something remains, not a majority, not even a remnant that feels secure. A tenth, small, reduced, vulnerable, but alive. The tenth is not merely a number, it is a principle. 10 represents completeness within structure, and a 10th represents the inner core of completeness that survives collapse. When outer forms fail and are stripped away, what remains is not what was loud or dominant, but what was aligned. The 10th is the part of the nation that cannot be destroyed because it is bound to purpose rather than circumstance. But here comes the shock. Even this remnant is not spared further trial. It will return and be burned again. Survival does not mean exemption. The refining continues. Anything that still carries attachment to false security must be purified further. The remnant is preserved not to be comfortable, but to be true. Yet the image shifts from fire to tree. A terebinth or an oak, when felled, appears dead. Its height is gone, its branches are destroyed. But the trunk remains underground, unseen, holding life in silence. This is not resilience through strength. It is resilience through rootedness. When everything visible has burned, identity, confidence, even spiritual language, something deeper can still remain. The holy seed is not what one displays. It is what one cannot give up even in despair. The verse says, "The holy seed is its trunk." Holiness here is not behavior or success. It is continuity of essence. Even when expression fails, essence remains. Even when the nation is scattered, something indivisible holds. This verse reframes everything that came before it. Blindness, exile, distance, burning, all of it was aimed not at annihilation, but at uncovering what cannot be destroyed. The repeated burning removes what is not seed. What remains is what God planted from the beginning. Renewal does not come by restoring old branches. It comes by new growth from ancient root. Isaiah ends his vision not with despair, but with subterranean hope. Not with rebuilding, but with rooting. Not with triumph, but with promise. The tree will fall again. The fire will return again. But the seed will not be lost. And from that seed, life will rise when the time is right.